Streaming now. 1 minute. Okay. Uh, okay, I think everything's good. Now we're on live. So I will start. Welcome everyone to the Cypress Testing in Angular meetup hosted by Angie Asia. My name is Ilyas Hoca. Today we are excited to have a Jordan Powell, an Angular Google developer expert from Cypress.io, as our guest speaker. Jordan is an expert in the field of software testing with a focus end-to-end testing using Cypress. In this meetup, Jordan will share his insight and experiences with Cypress component testing in Angular. He will dive into fundamentals of Cypress and demonstrate how it can be used to test individual Angular components in isolation. This approach allows developers to catch back early in a development cycle and improve overall quality of their application. We believe this meetup will be highly informative and available for anyone interested in software testing and Angular development. So whether you are a seasoned developer or just starting out, we encourage you to join us and learn from Jordan's expertise. Let's get ready to explore the world of Cypress component testing in Angular. So you can start, Jordan.
Yeah, for sure. Well, looks like I'm unable to share. Let me see if I can get access to share. Thank you for having me. Super excited to be here. This is what is it's NG Asia? Is it the name of the meetup here? Oh
Yeah.
man. It's
So
saying that it's been disabled from screen sharing.
okay, I will check. Yeah, can you
There
try
we go. Now I can. Yep.
Okay.
Perfect. All right. So now we should be good to go. Yeah, so today I'm gonna keep it pretty I have just a brief like high level explanation about like what is component testing and what does like what I like to say like modern Angular testing looks like. And then from there we can like go ahead and like we'll create a new Angular application and we can go ahead and like demo it out a little bit and then I'll answer any questions people have. So yeah, so like I said today I'm gonna talk about modern Angular testing and primarily with Cypress. And like you had said, my name is Jordan Powell. I'm a developer experience engineer here at Cypress. I am also a Google developer expert in Angular. And yeah, there's, I don't really like to talk about myself, but there's a little bit more about me. If you have questions about the talk or want to reach out, feel free. You can at Twitter at JordanPowell88 or LinkedIn or any of the socials. Feel free to reach out and love to talk testing or sports or anything. It'd be super fun. Okay, so today it's going to be, again, the agenda. It's going to be sort of like what's new in Angular. What does that have? Like, what are the implications of that when it comes to testing and kind of what I like to call the new testing order. And then we're going to do a little bit of a demo. So first, let's talk about like what's new in Angular itself. So over the last several releases, we've had pretty fundamentally, pretty, how do you say it? Pretty big changes when it comes to like Angular, the actual like framework itself. So the first one being standalone components are really exciting. A lot of people, and including myself, when I first saw it, I was like, I don't know, like I never really hated the modules per se. It was a bit of it definitely was a bit of a learning curve when I was learning Cypress, when I was learning Angular. But once I got the hang of them, I saw the value of it, of sort of not only grouping code together, but also sort of configuring dependency injection. I kind of liked it, and I still think it has its place today. But one of the great benefits that I was able to recognize pretty early on is that when we adopt standalone components, it actually makes testing our applications, especially with Cypress component testing, like an absolute breeze. Like it's like literally couldn't it be easier to test components now than it ever has been. So that's one of the things that really got me excited about standalone components. If you're not using standalone, don't worry, it's still very possible to and very easy to still test. But again, like these are the sort of things that are have been introduced into Angular that really have helped really make way for new improvements to the way we test. Also signals, right? So we have signals coming. We're kind of like in an interstitial state in between Zone.js and now moving to signals. And now we're like, okay, I have like my normal component state, like that's being run by change detection, and like, Zone.js is managing that, and then we have RxJS, which is doing, primarily for a lot of what we've done in the past, and now we have Signals, which is sort of, kind of like RxJS, but very different. It's kind of like a bridge between how we would manage state internally in classes and RxJS, and yeah, so like now, like how do we manage all these things, and what does the implications of implementing Signals and adopting that into our applications? What are the implications of that when it comes to testing? So here's an example of what I mean. So in this application, we have like a counter component, and it has a counter service that gets injected. We then have like a count observable that we're then pulling from that count service. And we're basically using the async pipe to read the count as it updates, right? Because it's an observable. And we notice that this is using standalone true. And so that's so you notice we're using the imports directly in imports and providers directly in our component declaration, which is not declaration in our component decorator. And this is like it feels funny at first, but it's basically the same sort of syntax that we're used to using inside of our modules, but it now can go in our components directly. And so this may seem like a subtle difference. When you go to test, this actually makes pretty significant change. Also, like how you would go about then testing something previously is you would have like the old way of testing where you would use like Karma to and configure the test bed, and then you'd have to basically go in and manually declare the component, add any imports, add any providers, all those types of things before compiling your component. The new way, because the responsibility that got pushed to the component itself to declare and configure itself, that you no longer have to then declare and import things like that inside of your test, because all you need to do is import the actual component itself, because the component then almost becomes like a module, and then inside of itself, it then has the declarations and the providers and all the things that it actually depends upon. So that means that we have to do way less wiring up and configuring our components in Angular when we use standalone, which is really exciting. Again, we were able to remove those 2 lines of code because we're using standalone. And so like how we would go about then in this, if we were to write like a karma test to basically test that you can increment the count. So you'd have to do some work, and then you basically would have to call fixture.detect changes to basically tell the test to detect changes that have been happened before we then can run assertions against it. But what if there was a better way? So like we didn't have such a verbose manual process for doing this sort of thing. But before I answer that, I first want to sort of shift gears and talk like what is a component. And a component, when you really step back, we think it's really simple, and we're just like, and we because we've primarily treated it as just like a unit test in the past. But if we think about what a component is, it's actually much more complex than we actually give it credit for. In Angular, a component is a class. That class has a template. It also oftentimes has dependencies that are injected, either the inject function or inside of its constructor. And then oftentimes that component has children. So it becomes very difficult. And so what we've done in the past is we would basically unit test various methods in our components, which is fine. However, that there can be some problems with that. One being that we still have an integration between the class and the template that we are not accounting for, mostly because oftentimes we're using a virtual DOM to sort of validate these things. And then we also oftentimes have to create stubs or mocks and things for our services because we have an integration between our class and our service, as well as our children. So then oftentimes we would unit test the actual any logic or something methods from our component class, and then we would rely upon end-to-end testing or sort of manual testing to handle UI things. And I think that this is the way I used to build components, and I think there's definitely some challenges to it. But even if we like look at a dumb component, even a dumb component has a class, or not or the other word is a presentation component. So even that has a class, there's a template, and it also has CSS, which we didn't even talk about in the previous slide. And so we could basically create a unit test that says we can new up essentially our component, we can instantiate it, we can create it, but we still have an integration here, we still have an integration here. And if we're using mocks for these, it's very difficult to really, any test you add is not really that valuable. And again, you then have to rely upon end-to-end test, Storybook, or some other type of tooling to sort of provide this. But how should, I test my components, right? Because you're like, well, if I look at the traditional testing pyramid, we know what end-to-end testing is, and we do lots of unit testing. And, what is an actual component, because I don't think it's just a unit, and it's not an end-to-end test. So it's kind of like an integration test, but like, what actually is it? The other thing is if we were to do something like this, where we set the style, basically the CSS, to be visibility hidden on this count from the DOM, the test will still pass, even though if you actually open it up in a browser, the actual count can be completely hidden from the actual user itself. And this is the side effect of when you're mocking out all those things and using a virtual DOM to handle testing of components, things that actually get rendered in a DOM. There's definitely edge cases that are not caught. So what I like to talk about is what I like to call the new testing order with Cypress. And if you haven't heard of Cypress, I won't go into detail, but we have over 5 million downloads a week. It's a very popular tool. It's really the bread and butter, like the kind of the go-to top of the line end-to-end testing tool. And we really recently came out with component testing, which what I'm going to intro here in a second and show you how to use. But what I like to say is, what I like to, and again, this is just like my thoughts, is really the new testing pyramid consists of a healthy amount of end-to-end tests, a healthy amount of component tests, and you can even do API testing with components. So we have this sort of triangle-like diagram where our tests are dispersed, and you still may need some unit tests, and you may have less API tests or more end-to-end tests or more component tests or less component tests. So this is just a guideline of, instead of thinking in this very rigid structure, there is some, in this diagram, there is areas where the test types intersect, and you may that's where there's some level of interpretation of where those things, the bleed is and what you want to do. So again, if we go back to a component, what we really want to do is we want to take that component and we want to put it in a browser, because that's the way our users actually use our component. But we don't want to interact with our component like this in a browser. We want to interact with it like this, where we have an actual application that is viewed like a user actually sees it, and we want to see the count that gets incremented, and we want to click the plus button and see it increment. So that's the sort of thing we want to do. And if you were to do the same test in a Cypress where you hide it from the DOM, the test is actually going to fail, because it's going to say, hey, like, I don't see that count that we talked about, right? So this is, again, this caught that edge case, and because it's actually doing a much more production true test of your application in your components. The other thing is, like, writing tests this way is like significantly easier. Again, this is with a standalone component. All we have to do is use the mount command that comes with Cypress, and you just mount your component, and then you just begin using the Cypress API to essentially do all the things you maybe have already done. Or if you haven't used it before, no big deal. It's really easy. You just mount the component. You then get elements from the DOM. You interact with them. So in this case, we mount the component. We get the count, the element that has a count ID, and then we validate that it equals 0. We then get the button that contains the plus, basically the plus button, and click it. And then we go back to that count button, the count ID, and make sure that it incremented to 1. So this is a production like test that took only 4 lines of code, which is really, really amazing and powerful. And it's a much more truer example of how this works. And in this case, we didn't care about we didn't have to do any stubbing of our count service, or we didn't have to do any sort of wiring up of our test bed. All of this is responsibility sort of kind of encapsulated from the user. And like you said, we're using the site@mount command here. So let's go ahead now, and let me stop sharing, and I'm going to change my screen, and let's go ahead and create an actual application where we can actually see this working. Let's see. Let me reshare my screen. If anyone has questions, feel free to they could stop. You can interject me, but here I'm just going to open up a new terminal here, and I'm going to write ng new, and let's create Angular counter test application. We don't really need routing. We can use CSS Sass. We'll just use CSS for now. And we're going to go ahead and create this. Waiting for npm packages to install. Okay, let's cd into the Angular counter application. We'll go ahead and open this up in code, and we can begin to see this just normal Angular application. Let's go ahead and install Cypress, which is really easy. We just do Cypress, install Cypress, the latest version, as a dev dependency. Go ahead and run this. And at this point, Cypress is installed. And so we can launch Cypress by doing, let me make this a little bit bigger just so you guys can see it. npx Cypress open. And then at this point, Cypress will launch. And it's going to tell you, you're going to be greeted at the screen where it's like, which type of testing do you want to do? Previously, you did end-to-end testing, and basically you would visit a route of an application that's already served, either on a production URL or like a local dev server or something like this. But in this case, we're going to pick component testing. And basically, Cypress is automatically going to detect that we're using Angular. But we have support for React, and all the meta frameworks like Next and Create React App, and we have Vue and Svelte, as well as we have a list of third-party integrations. So we have like Quick, Solid.js, and others. I think we have Lit. There may be more as well, but anyways, we'll go ahead and click Next, and Cypress detects this. It's going to say, yes, your dependencies needed to run this are already installed. We'll press continue. And then it's going to essentially scaffold out, create a config, and a few other files for us. We'll go ahead and press continue. And it's going to tell us what browser do we want to launch this in. And in our case, we can just use Chrome. It's going to basically detect browsers from your already installed in your machine. Let me make this smaller. And here it's going to tell us that, hey, we don't have any actual specs installed. So let's go ahead and create like an actual test. So this is just the default Angular application that gets compiled. So we have, as of now, just one component. Displays this Angular counter title. But we could go ahead and create a new file called app.component. And Cypress just uses by default the .sci.ts spec pattern. So in this case, we can go ahead and let's describe the name of our test. We'll call it app components. And we will then just write a test to validate that it can mount into the DOM. So in this case, we do sci.mount, and we're going to mount app component. We're going to import that component, press save, and we're now see that Cypress automatically detected the app component we just created, this test. And we see now here, let me collapse this a bit. You'll see now, like this is exactly what our app looks like. And it's actually, we didn't have to serve our application or anything. Cypress handled all of that for us just by mounting this component. And we can do a very granular component, or we can do something very, very high level, is like an app component like this. And here we see Angular app is running. We could then interact with this. We could inspect this using we could see all network requests that are made as part of doing this. We can now see any console logs. We could see sources. This is the actual DOM. We could select something and see, oh, this is some span. It has an SVG. So you get all the things you're normally doing in your DOM, but you can sort of get this live right here inside of Cypress. So let me, for the sake of this demo, let's go ahead and scoot this over like this. Let me go ahead and move this here. And we have this app component, but let's change this. So like, we don't want all this stuff in here. So this is how I actually like to develop with Cypress, is that it's really easy because we can just mount the component that we're working on and then just sort of like build it side by side. So here we have this like resources. So let me find the resources ID. We can say, I don't really want this. Let's delete all this. Let's get rid of the next steps, the terminal part, the footer. Here. All right, let's keep the clouds. Let's do this. And let's save this. And you'll now see we now got rid of all that. And we just saved, and Cypress automatically reran for us. We see this rocket ship thing. So yeah, we have this like very, very simple sort of feel here. But let's go ahead and create a new component. So let me create a new tab. I'm going to leave this open, and let's do ng generate component, and we'll call it counter. Yep. So now we have a new counter component, and here, let's go ahead inside of underneath app is running. Let's do app counter. Go ahead and put this in here, and I think we can do this now in Angular. So now we will get this, and we are not using standalone, so we need to, in this, let's see, let's go ahead and create a test inside of here called counter dot component dot side.ts, and let's describe this. It can mount, and let's say, oops, I don't want this. Let's say side at mounts, counter component, and let's do this. Let's go back to our specs, open this, and we now get a counter, our counter component, right? But like the counter component doesn't really do much. Let's write a test though. This is how you can do TDD really effectively, is you can go ahead and write a test before we actually implement this. So we could say, we want to write a test that says, let's go ahead and make this a little bigger. We could say, it can increment the count. The same thing, we'll just use the same example from the example I used earlier. So let's go ahead and mount our components. Then let's say we want to get something with the ID of counter and say it contains the value 0. Then let's say we need to get a button that contains a plus sign. We want to click that, and then we want to go back to the counter ID and say it should contain 1. So this is basically the test we have. This is going to fail because we never implemented any of this. So let's go back to here. We know we need let's go ahead and create an H3 with an ID of counter because we said that we needed something like that. And let's set this to something called count, which is not defined yet, but we can go here and let's create count and set it to 0. So see, now we got the counter. We found that we got it that it contains 0, but then we try to go to the next step, which is getting a button that contains plus, and it doesn't have that. So let's go ahead now here. Let's create a button that is let's see, that is a minus, and then let's get a button that is a plus. And now we have, we're getting now down to the bottom part, but we're not actually incrementing anything. So now we need to do some wiring up of this. So we need to do, for the sake of this, let's add a click method to this, and let's call increment a method that we don't have wired up yet in here. And let's just do increment and say this dot count equals +1, something like this. So now we have a green passing test. So that's how you can very easily do TDD with this. The other cool thing is we could add styles. So we could do something like, hey, I want my buttons to have a padding of like 20 pixels. And now we have like a really big padding on our buttons, and maybe we want the margin to be like 0 and 10 pixels in between. So now we have like a bigger gap here. You could do like, H3, let's make the color of this to be red. So now you can sort of get this TDD really quick experience of going back and forth. You also notice that we can still interact with this in the DOM as if it was just in like a normal browser, because it is just in a normal browser, which is one of the great parts of this. So let's go ahead and create another test for decrementing, and then we'll finish putting that in. We can say it can decrement account, and then we can basically kind of do the same, copy and paste most of this, And then instead we want to get the button that contains this. And in this case, it should be -1. So now we still have a failing test because we haven't actually implemented this click handler. Let's do click equals decrement. Let's go here and same sort of thing. But we're going to call this decrement and we're going to say -1. So now we have 3 passing tests. So this is how, again, you can get this very, very TDD like experience, and you didn't have to serve our application and see this button in the scope of like the main application or anything like that, which is really, really cool. The other thing is that if we wanted to say change this from, we're not using signals in this application yet, but if we wanted to if we were basically writing a unit test that validated that it incremented the count, we could do that, but it would then just test this logic. But the problem would be is once we did a refactor of our state management from, say, using like Zone.js here to maybe it's RxJS, maybe it's NGRX, maybe it's signals, all of these tests would break. But if we write the test like this, where we're testing from the DOM, all these tests would still pass once we finished our refactor, which is the really valuable part of this. So yeah, that's basically how you go about doing this in Cypress. There is some additional things you can do in this Cypress support folder. There is a you will see this where we actually set up that mount command. Cypress, the mount comes from the Cypress Angular library, and then we set up the mount here. If there was additional things you wanted to do, you'd have to do like we won't set the types, but it'd be like component and then config, and then you basically could do something like this where you return mount passing component and then do config plat plus something like imports of shared module if you had one or something like this. So this is how you can basically, on every single time you mount your component, you can add additional things, so that way you don't have to do repetitive tasks like this in every single test that you write. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Do we have any questions? I know I think we're right at 30 minutes here, but wanted to stop here and I guess answer questions you guys might have.
Okay, I will check the question from our live chat. Okay, we don't have any question yet.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. So that's that is kind of how it works. It's really easy to get it set up and going. If you're using NX, there's generators and schematics for getting set up that way as well. So yeah, and then here is, for all the people watching, this is the event code. So if you go here, scan this QR code, or click on, basically go to this link, type in CTPAL. There's a couple questions. Cypress will send out some t-shirts or swags to you, and then it gives you opportunity to give me some feedback on how I did today. Let me improve. If there's things I can do to be better at presenting things like this, I'd love to know. But yeah, that is all of the talk. But hopefully that was helpful to you guys. I don't know. Have you tried component testing yet? Is it something that you're familiar with?
Yeah, in our company we are using Cypress now for component testing and end-to-end testing. Is everything is very good. So I will recommend to use the Cypress in all application on Angular. personally. So thank you very much to your presentation, to your knowledge. So thank you for your time.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you again. Have a nice day.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.